Buckle up, folks, because we're diving headfirst into the clown show that is the Democrat Party, where criminals get sympathy, law-abiding citizens get lectured, and the people running the asylum are more concerned with protecting feelings than protecting lives. Case in point, Boston's very own Michelle Wu, who took a break from running her city just long enough to apologize to a knife-wielding attacker. Not the victims, not the police who had to clean up the mess, but the guy trying to stab people. You can't make this up. It's like the left has developed a reflex where their first instinct is always to side with the worst person in the room. And tonight we got plenty more where that came from, because nothing sums up progressive leadership better than rewarding failure and punishing success. Let's get into it.
My condolences and all of our thoughts are with the family of the individual whose life has been lost.
Michelle Wu, the self-appointed queen of Boston's progressive circus, just pulled off a classic liberal magic trick, turning a violent criminal into a misunderstood victim. A knife-wielding attacker goes on a rampage. Police neutralize the threat like they're supposed to, and instead of backing the people who actually keep her city from descending into chaos, Wu decides the real tragedy here is the guy with the knife. You can't make this up. Now, let's break down what's really happening here. This isn't just a bad joke. It's a symptom of the entire left's obsession with prioritizing criminals over law-abiding citizens. These people don't see violent crime as a problem. They see it as a social experiment. That's why their first instinct isn't to support law enforcement, but to frame every police response as some sort of moral failure. It's the same tired routine we've seen play out in every Democrat-run city. Let criminals run wild, demonize the cops when they step in, and then act shocked when crime spirals out of control. And let's not forget the language game they play. Progressives like Wu always wrap their bad decisions in soft, manipulative rhetoric. Restorative justice, equity in policing, systemic failures. Translation, they don't actually want to deal with crime. They just want to rebrand it until you stop noticing it. But when push comes to shove, when someone is actually getting attacked in their streets, suddenly they remember, oh right, police exist for a reason. They just won't admit it out loud. Now, this clip went viral over the last couple of days on X, and I bet that you will never guess how the mayor reacted to that clip going viral.
I expressed condolences along with our police commissioner and district attorney, because every loss of life is a horrible tragedy.
Wow, Michelle serving up the Wu, but very little tang, turning a violent criminal into the real victim while barely acknowledging the people he tried to harm. This is what happens, folks, when your entire political ideology revolves around empty platitudes instead of reality. Now, the rhetorical gymnastics here are amazing. Every loss of life is a horrible tragedy. Sounds nice, right? Real compassionate, but let's not pretend that means anything when it's applied indiscriminately. A violent attacker getting stopped before he can do more damage is not a tragedy. It's law enforcement doing its job. Calling it a tragedy equates a knife-wielding criminal with an innocent victim, which is exactly the kind of moral relativism that gets people hurt. And here's the real trick. Wu wants you to believe that acknowledging a criminal's actions in clear terms would somehow be inhumane. Instead, she takes the safe, progressive route, expressing broad, vague sympathies that don't require her to actually take a stance. This is the same rhetorical sleight of hand the left always pulls. Dilute the truth until no one's responsible for anything. The criminal isn't a violent threat. He's just another tragedy. And who are we to judge? Meanwhile, notice the lack of urgency in addressing the real victims, the people who were attacked. Just a footnote, the off-duty police officer who had to step in and risk his life barely mentioned, because acknowledging them would require Wu to admit that policing, yes, the thing she and her allies demonize at every turn, actually works. It would require her to step out of the progressive bubble where criminals are misunderstood and cops are the real villains. And we all know she's not about to do that. Look, at the end of the day, this is why cities run by Democrats like Wu are in free fall. They refuse to differentiate between good and evil, between law-abiding citizens and violent offenders, between essential services and criminal characters who have nothing but a detrimental effect to the fabric of society. Democrats like Wu want you to believe the system is a problem, not the people wreaking havoc. And if that means throwing victims, police, and basic common sense under the bus, so be it. And speaking of throwing common sense under the bus, this individual, whatever the hell they are, just puts it in reverse and runs right over common sense again, because When it comes to the left, they can never kill common sense enough.
And they aren't going to stop being transgender just because you strip them from sports or from housing or from their health care or any other public place that you don't want us to be. And so members, make no mistake that this is just another version of state-sanctioned bullying and genocide.
What?
And I don't say that lightly.
Yeah. Well, folks, it looks like we finally arrived at the point where not letting biological men compete against women in sports is somehow genocide. Congratulations. We've officially broken the English language. Now, let's start with the obvious. Genocide has an actual definition, believe it or not. Genocide is a deliberate extermination of an entire people. Mass killings, forced sterilization, ethnic cleansing, actual atrocities, war crimes, some would say. What it doesn't mean is enforcing basic biological distinctions in competitive sports. But Democrats like Alicia Kozlowski love to take words with weight, words with historical meaning, and stretch them so far they become absolutely meaningless. It's rhetorical inflation, something that is a part of Bidenomics, I guess. Because when everything is genocide, quite literally, nothing is. And let's break down the manipulative framing here. They aren't gonna stop being transgender just because you strip them from sports or housing or healthcare. See how that works? She casually throws in sports with actual necessities like housing and medical care, lumping it all together as if they're equivalent. They're not. Nobody has a human right to dominate women's athletics. And yet, by stacking the deck with emotionally loaded issues, she tries to make opposition seem cruel and oppressive. Classic false equivalence. Then, of course, comes the real weapon, the appeal to victimhood. This is just another version of state-sanctioned bullying and genocide. State-sanctioned. Because, keeping men out of women's sports is basically Jim Crow now. It's the same playbook the left always runs. If they can't argue on facts, they moralize. They take any pushback against their agenda and frame it as some apocalyptic human rights violation. If you oppose them, you're not just wrong, you're evil. Here's what Kozlowski doesn't want to admit. Allowing biological males into women's sports is unfair. It destroys the level playing field. It erases the opportunities women fought for. This isn't about inclusion, it's about domination. But instead of addressing those legitimate concerns, she cries genocide, hoping the sheer absurdity of the claim will distract from the real issue. So here's a radical idea. Let's stop redefining words to fit political narratives. Let's stop pretending that women having their own sports is some kind of human rights abuse. And most importantly, let's stop tolerating politicians who use a language like a weapon, because if everything is genocide, then nothing is. And that kind of intellectual dishonesty only makes the world more dangerous. And since we're on the topic of dangers, Democrat Representative Jasmine Crockett, who has a dangerously low IQ, gave us this hot turd of a take.
Unfortunately, we have someone that is occupying the White House, and as far as I'm concerned, he is an enemy to the United States.
Oh my God.
He swore an oath just like the rest of us. But right now, when you are literally putting us at risk, all because of what? Because you want to convince your followers that you should be a dictator too, that you should never leave the White House because you don't believe that elections should take place. I don't really understand what is going on, and I don't know what it's going to take to get people to wake up.
Oh, look, another Democrat melting down because Trump isn't bending the knee to their endless war machine. Jasmine Crockett, in her infinite wisdom, has declared that the President of the United States is an enemy of the country because he's questioning our blank check policy with Ukraine, because he's prioritizing America's interests over Zelensky's wish list. The bar for treason sure has dropped fast, hasn't it, folks? Now let's start with the most glaring issue, the projection. Crockett screeches about Trump supposedly wanting to be a dictator while completely ignoring the fact that her own party has been the one using federal agencies to prosecute political opponents, silencing dissent on social media, and unilaterally rewriting election laws. Who exactly is trying to hold on to power by any means necessary? Because last time I checked, Trump's not the one arresting his political rivals and using lawfare to keep them off the ballot. Oh yeah, that's right. That's the Democrats doing all that. And then there's the sheer dishonesty. She says he doesn't believe elections should take place. Really? Is that why he quite literally ran in 3, and in the one that he lost, he left the White House? This is just the same tired narrative they've been spinning since 2020. Pretend that questioning election integrity is the same as staging a coup. Meanwhile, these are the same people who cried about stolen elections in 2000, 2004, and 2016, and had no problem when Hillary Clinton called Trump's presidency illegitimate for 4 years straight. But suddenly, if Trump so much as raises an eyebrow about election security, he's a dictator in waiting. But the real heart of Crockett's rant is Ukraine. This is what's really got Democrats foaming at the mouth right now. Trump dares to suggest that maybe the U.S. shouldn't be an ATM for Zelensky, and suddenly Trump's a traitor. What happened to Democrats being the anti-war party? What happened to questioning foreign entanglements? Oh, yeah, that's right. It all went out the window the moment they realized they could funnel billions of taxpayer dollars into the war they have no intention of ending. The second Trump suggests putting America first, they brand him a threat to democracy. Look, this isn't about Trump's rhetoric or saving democracy. It's about control. The war hawk establishment and the military-industrial complex need Ukraine as their latest forever war. And Trump is a threat to that gravy train. Crockett, like every other Democrat, is just parroting the party script, hoping that if they all yell dictator and enemy loud enough, people won't notice the real scam, selling out America's interests for another foreign war while pretending it's about democracy. And since we're on the topic of low IQ Democrats, in enters AOC in this recent interview she did with NPR, which is just chef's kiss of idiotic takes. It's one after the other, folks, and we're going to just look at as many as we can. Unfortunately, we don't have time for everything. We'd be here for the rest of our lives if we looked at every idiotic thing AOC has done and said. So we're just going to get the best. Here's your Sports Center highlights of AOC being an absolutely unfettered idiot.
Dean Phillips, one of your fellow Democratic members, was on television this past week, Fox News, as a matter of fact, and he appeared to wish Democrats acted a little more like Trump in this way. He wished that they would appeal to business people, to get smart people into government, to talk about efficiency. He seemed to wish Democrats would do what Elon Musk is doing, even if he doesn't agree with the way that Elon Musk is doing it.
I would say that instead of appealing to other politicians, we should be appealing to the American people. And if you ask the American people what they think of what Elon Musk and Doge are doing with government right now, they are vehemently opposed.
Wow, AOC is really trying to convince us that the American people are vehemently opposed to Elon Musk cutting waste, fraud, and abuse from the federal government. Which American people is she talking about? The ones who live in her blue sky replies? Because if you actually look at the data, the real American people, the ones who work, pay taxes, and aren't glued to MSNBC, overwhelmingly support reducing government bloat. Now, notice how she doesn't cite a single poll or data point to back up her claim. Instead, she just declares that the American people are against it, as if saying it makes it true. This is a textbook example of argumentum ad populum fallacy, pretending that an opinion is widely held when there is no evidence to support it. And in this case, the evidence actually shows the opposite. Poll after poll has shown that Americans favor cutting government waste, and a huge majority, even across party lines, believe the federal government is too big and inefficient. But AOC doesn't let pesky things like facts get in the way of a good soundbite. And then there's the irony. AOC, a self-proclaimed socialist, is suddenly concerned with what business leaders are doing with government. She and her party have spent years demanding that private businesses bow to state control, pushing for government interference in industries from energy to tech to finance. Hell, this woman literally expelled Amazon from her borough. They were going to bring thousands of jobs to Queens, and she made sure they couldn't go there. But the second someone like Elon Musk, who's actually productive and innovative, decides to expose how bloated and corrupt the system is, suddenly it's a crisis. Suddenly it's unacceptable. Funny how that works. And let's not ignore the fact that Doge is extremely popular. Elon Musk isn't some fringe figure. He's widely admired, especially among young voters, independents, and even a sizable chunk of Democrats. If AOC actually bothered to step outside her carefully curated social media echo chamber, she'd realize that many Americans see Musk's push for efficiency as exactly what's needed in government, drowning in red tape and bureaucratic incompetence. But instead, she relies on projection, pretending her own views are the views of the majority because she desperately wants that to be true. Now look, this isn't about Elon Musk or even government waste. It's about control. The left thrives on big government because it's their power source. When someone exposes that system for the bloated mess it is, they panic. AOC knows that if Americans actually get a taste of what real efficiency looks like, they might start questioning why we need so many bureaucrats, why we're paying for so much government waste, and why politicians like her keep demanding more power while delivering absolutely nothing. That's the real fear. Not Musk, not Doge, but the possibility that people might wake up and realize that a leaner, more efficient government isn't just possible, it's absolutely necessary.
To what extent is immigration as an issue part of your problem with working class voters?
I mean, I guess my question would be what does the word problem mean?
People voting for the
Point
other
Bill
side
Clinton.
and not for you.
Yeah.
Feeling that Democrats are not serious about the issue in ways that concern them.
I think that we have a problem on immigration because of the lack of progress that we've had on this issue. And as we know, Republicans weaponized that lack of progress. Of course, there was famously a bipartisan bill last year that the Republican majority in the Senate and also in the House were willing to pass. President Biden was willing to work with them on it. And Donald Trump said, do not solve this problem. As long as it is broken, then it will be politically beneficial for us. And so
It's literally
it
how it
is a
happened.
problem not just for Democrats. It's a problem for the entire country that Republicans do not want to solve any sort of issue with immigration. They are completely uninterested
So dishonest.
in addressing undocumented people, in addressing a path to citizenship.
Well, they do want to address undocumented people by removing them. I mean, that's what the president is attempting now.
Even then, you see what Republicans did with the Laken Riley Act recently in their passage with it, in that they authorized the complete gutting of due process. So now you can take a DACA recipient, a dreamer, just accuse them of a crime.
And deport them.
And however, they also understand that they don't even have the infrastructure to do that. So they're actually creating it's not even about creating a deportation pipeline. They are creating a private prison camp pipeline. So
What?
they're still creating pipelines to just increase this problem here in the United States.
What we witnessed was a masterclass in blame shifting, gaslighting, and outright lying, all while trying to rewrite history in real time. Apparently, after 4 years of Biden's open border disaster, where we've seen record illegal crossings, fentanyl floods, and literal terrorists waltzing into the country, it's Republicans' fault. According to AOC, it's the Republicans' fault because they refused to pass another amnesty bill. That's the argument. All right, well, let's tear this whole thing apart. First, let's talk historical revisionism. AOC claims Republicans don't want to solve immigration. That's funny because now that Trump's in office, border crossings are down over 90%, the lowest that we've seen likely in history, definitely in decades, and definitely the greatest in the last 4 years. Why? Because his administration actually enforces the law. He made border security a priority. He militarized the border, increased barriers, shut down Biden's immigration, and focused on deportations of criminals. The results? Fewer illegal entries, fewer cartels exploiting the system, fewer criminals slipping through the cracks. That's quite literally solving the problem. Now let's compare that to Biden. The second he got into office, he reversed everything Trump had put into place in his first term. He scrapped Remain in Mexico. He stopped border wall construction. He ended Title 42 without a replacement strategy. He created catch and release on an industrial scale, encouraging millions to cross illegally, knowing they'd just be let in. And now, after his administration has spent 4 years flooding the country with illegal immigrants, quite literally 10 million people overwhelming our cities, draining taxpayer resources and increasing crime, AOC wants to act like this was all some Republican strategy. No, this was quite literally Biden's neoliberal policy, and it was purely intentional. And then we get AOC's crocodile tears over the Laken Riley Act, named after a 22-year-old woman who was murdered by an illegal immigrant who should have never been in this country to begin with. AOC wants to spin this as some attack on due process for dreamers. Reality check, the bill is about deporting violent criminals, not randomly targeting DACA recipients. It explicitly states that illegal immigrants convicted of theft, burglary, larceny, or violent crimes will be deported. what's AOC's real problem here. That some of the people she coddles might actually face consequences for breaking the law, that we won't just let dangerous criminals stay in the country unchecked. And let's not ignore her fear-mongering about private prison camp pipelines. That's pure propaganda designed to distract from the fact that Democrats have made the border crisis worse by refusing to enforce immigration laws. No one is setting up some secret gulag for dreamers. What's actually happening is that the U.S. is being forced to deal with millions of illegal crossings because the people who are in charge, aka Biden, Kamala Harris, and this chick over here, refused to control the border. AOC and her allies want mass amnesty, open borders, and no consequences for illegal entry because their interest is to blue lock red states. So when Republicans refuse to rubber stamp that insanity, she turns around and claims they're the real problem. At the end of the day, this is the same gaslighting routine the left always plays. They create the disaster, refuse to fix it, and then blame Republicans when voters finally get fed up. AOC knows the American people have turned against the Biden administration, have voted Democrats out en masse. They gave Trump a mandate. She knows even blue cities are collapsing under the weight of these policies. So now she's spinning this fairy tale while Trump and the GOP are somehow responsible for Biden's failures. But no amount of whining and word games will erase the facts. This border crisis is 100% a Democrat-made disaster, and Trump has already, in just about a month, pretty much fixed it.
You had a recent dispute, if that's the right word, with Tom Homan, the president's Homeland Security czar, so-called. You held an online forum, a Know Your Rights forum, that he didn't like. What were you doing? What was your goal as you saw it?
My job is to educate and act as a liaison of critical information to my constituents. And I was informing all of my constituents of their constitutional protections, and in particular, their constitutional protections against illegal search and seizure in the United States.
Homan was upset, I suppose, because he felt that you were giving advice to people who were here illegally. Mm-hmm. Were you?
I was giving advice to all of my constituents. Yeah.
He said he was going to report you, or even that he did reach out to the Department of Justice. Have you heard from the Department of Justice?
I have not, and I intend on reaching out to the Department of Justice to inquire.
Really? What would your question be for the Department of Justice?
Well, there is a member of the Trump administration who is threatening and seeks to open an inquiry, and are you going to do it?
What would you learn? What do you hope to learn from that exchange?
I think it's important to know where this administration stands and if they intend on using political intimidation to silence their critics.
AOC is spinning another self-inflicted controversy into some grand tale of political persecution. This time she's pretending that border czar Tom Homan is trying to silence her for what exactly? She claims she was informing her constituents about their rights. Now that's a cute story, but let's break down the actual issues she's dodging. AOC claims she was simply educating all of her constituents about their rights as if she was holding some generic civics class on the Fourth Amendment. But let's not play dumb, even though that's what the Democrats think of us. This wasn't a neutral legal seminar. This was a Know Your Rights event explicitly aimed at illegal immigrants, coaching them on how to evade law enforcement, obstruct ICE operations, and avoid deportation. That's not informing constituents. That's actively interfering with immigration enforcement. She can try to dress it up as public service, but what she's really doing is undermining the rule of law. Then we have the victim complex in full force. Instead of addressing the actual concern, she was advising illegal immigrants on how to defy federal law in an Instagram Live. AOC immediately pivots to portraying herself as a target of political intimidation because, of course, when a government official is questioned for actively working against law enforcement, she's the real victim. Notice how she doesn't actually deny what Homan accused her of. She just frames the situation as if it's some authoritarian crackdown on dissent. This is the classic straw man, misrepresenting the argument to make yourself look like the brave defender of democracy instead of someone enabling illegal activity. And let's not ignore the blatant gaslighting. AOC acts as if she's informing illegal immigrants of their constitutional protections is just standard procedure. But here's the problem. Illegal immigrants do not have the same constitutional protections as U.S. citizens, especially when it comes to deportation proceedings. ICE officers operating under federal immigration law are not bound by the same rules as local police conducting criminal civil investigations. Immigration enforcement is civil law, not criminal, which means things like search and seizure protections don't apply in the same way. AOC knows this, but instead of being honest, she deliberately blurs the line to create a false narrative where ICE is violating constitutional rights every time they enforce immigration law. And finally, the projection. AOC claims she's reaching out to the DOJ because she wants to know if the Trump administration is using political intimidation to silence critics. That's rich, considering her own party has spent the last 4 years doing exactly that, weaponizing the DOJ and FBI against political opponents, launching lawfare campaigns against Trump, and prosecuting anyone who dares to challenge their agenda. But sure, the real problem is the border czar, quite literally trying to do his job. Look, I don't think I have to tell any of you this is all just a distraction. AOC is trying to shift the conversation away from the fact that she was caught advising illegal immigrants on how to avoid law enforcement. She knows that's a bad look, so she does what she does best, cries political persecution, reframes the issue to make herself the victim, and relies on a media that won't push back. In fact, NPR was just jerking her off the whole time. This is as softball as it gets. But no amount of spin changes the facts. She wasn't educating constituents, she was actively working against the enforcement of U.S. immigration law. And no, people aren't buying it. At some point, you have to ask yourself, how much of this is incompetence and how much is by design? How many times do we watch politicians like AOC twist reality, rewrite history, and cry persecution before we realize that their entire strategy depends on keeping you distracted? They don't want accountability, they want obedience. They don't want uninformed public, they want a manipulated one. And every time they frame law enforcement as a villain and lawbreakers as the victims, they're betting that you won't notice a bigger game at play. So the real question isn't whether they're lying, that's the obvious part. The question is, why do they need you to believe it? And more importantly, how much longer are people willing to fall for it? Anyway, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Have a terrific day. Peace.